Hey Michael, this is Yann van Ewijk.
Nice to meet you too.
That you can join. For our viewers, this is Michael Jackson here at Bitcoin Wednesday. I believe the 62 event of the past several years. Here in Amsterdam. Really glad that you are here today. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got involved into cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin?
Sure. Well, it's a bit of a long story because it was quite a long time ago. I'm an investor with Mangrove Capital Partners, a venture investor there. But before that, I was with Skype. Skype was one of the early...
Yeah, who doesn't know Skype these
Who doesn't
days?
know Skype, right? But the interesting thing about Skype was it was a very distributed network. It had no single point of command. It had nothing. Many of the things that the early crypto people were on about. So one day I was on a train coming in from London Airport and I bumped into a friend of mine completely randomly, and he said, why don't you come with me to a meetup? And the meetup was in London, and it was one of the very early Bitcoin meetups, one of the very early Bitcoin developer meetups there. And I went along to that, and I went into this room, and the room was about 20 or 30 people in there, and they were some of the iconic names from basically the Bitcoin world then. Yeah. And I just found it fascinating. It reminded me of the early days of the internet. I did an ISP. I started an ISP way back in 95, and before that at university I was involved with connecting the university to the internet. So I've sort of grown up with all of that, and I was back into that whole thing, and I thought, wow, this is fun. And I just kept hanging around with it, not really taking it too seriously, right?
You're still into it nowadays.
I'm still into it 5 years later or something. Yeah, pretty...
Pretty amazing. What are you doing now with the technology and with Bitcoin at the moment?
Yeah, so Bitcoin or in general, distributed technology, I think is extremely interesting. As an investor, I've guided our investment fund, which is a traditional institutional investment fund who normally buy equities and these sort of things, shares of companies, to try and navigate this space. So I spent a lot of the last basically year since the ICO story really started to escalate to get our company up to speed and to begin to make some investments into the loosely called Bitcoin or crypto space or whatever you want to call it. To get our...
That's great. It's an interesting space, and especially the last several years we've had the change of the venture capitalism to the ICO world, the decentralized finance world. What is your viewpoint on it? How can it be more efficient for startups or,
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I really think is going to be a huge advantage of the new way of distributed fundraising that we can talk about today. We've seen a few projects run, a few hundred projects come through the ICO world, and many of it is experimental, of course. There are some things that are good.
Everything in the cryptocurrency is
everything's super experimental, right? There's no question that nothing is defined and nothing is certain, and things are going to be different in a few years than they are now. But again, we're experimenting, and it's odd to be experimenting with massive amounts of money being invested as well. But put that to one side. My vision is this. I believe there's no reason why anybody who needs to raise money should be restricted to just going to a bank or just going to a venture capital company or something like that. There are many, many people in the world who understand their needs much, much better than the institutions do, and they should be free to go to the open market to, let's say, raise capital. And whether that's a large amount of money for building a nuclear power station, or whether it's a small amount of money for, getting a new coffee machine for your cafe or something, it should be the same.
It should be the same, okay. So going sideways, it's great the vision that you have. I actually share the same vision. Everyone should have access to capital eventually. And I also heard something called blockchain.com. Could you...
Yeah, sure. In fact, when I was talking about my early meetup there, when I was at one of these early meetups, I got to be friends with blockchain.com, or as it was then blockchain.info, which was basically .info. It was a block explorer on the Bitcoin blockchain, where you could see all the transactional things and lots of data and what have you on that. And what we started to do, what blockchain.com started to do, was develop a wallet. And the interesting thing about this wallet is it's a place to store your Bitcoin or Ether now or whatever. What's interesting about it, as opposed to Coinbase or some of the other centralized systems, is it's in your phone. You're not relying on a central repository. You're not relying on Coinbase.
So
you're your own bank.
the secret keys are
The secret keys are yours.
Yeah.
They're sitting on your phone.
That is quite nice. Although you have to trust, I believe, then the blockchain.com Explorer.
You do have to trust it a little bit.
Yeah.
Although ultimately you've still got hopefully you've still got your backup wallet keys or backup wallet words and things which allow you to re-establish the wallet on a different platform if you ever need to do it. So of course, as you know, the wallet's it's looking at the chain. It's not actually holding the money per se. It's looking at the chain.
Yeah.
So and it's just guarding your keys. So that's a very good way of doing what we call a non-custodial thing. It means that you don't have any responsibility for the person's funds. They have responsibility themselves. And of course, that's a problem if you go and lose your phone, of course.
If you, then you have eventually, in these days, cybersecurity and cryptocurrencies are two paths leading to the same answer eventually. So these days you have hardware wallets.
Yeah.
Is it also possible to connect a hardware wallet with this?
Yeah, this is something which is all part of the whole ecosystem around that. So that's the idea exactly. Obviously, a phone wallet is great, but if you lose your phone and you lose your wallet, that's obviously not any good for anybody. We recognise that completely. But where we think is this is a lot closer to the dream of a distributed cryptocurrency world than having just your money deposited, custodial deposited in whatever, in the host of other ones, which is really no different to having it in a bank. And as we saw in Mt. Gox or something way back then, when that went under, everybody lost their assets, lost their money. Yeah. And I think being able to store not just digital currencies, but digital assets
as well
on your phone. It's a development, of course, which is coming. Digital asset and tokenization of assets is something which is coming.
Definitely great, thank you. So, what do you envision is the space for cryptocurrency and blockchain in general in, say, the next 20 years?
20 years, that's a good question.
Yeah, so I wasn't raised by the internet.
Right.
I knew computers when I got my own computer, and that's when I entered the internet. But you obviously have the experience of seeing it all from the beginning till now. So, in hindsight, what do you?
Well, what I can see, yes, exactly. I went through the whole growth of computers there when I started programming when I was 12, 13 years old. It was in a mainframe environment in a company because there was no personal computer. It didn't really exist, and we started to build them and make them and all of that kind of stuff. That was a lot of fun. Where I see the cryptocurrency or the digital asset world moving is exactly what I described a second ago. It is that we're going to have a lot more digital assets about us. They're going to be currency, they're going to be our digital identity, they're going to be property or tokens that represent property that we own, and we're going to be masters of the destiny around those. We're going to be keeping those within wallets, within our.
So it's our own thing.
It's our own thing. And I think sometimes it's difficult to conceptualize that if you live in sort of Northern Europe and things like the countries, in Holland or where you live, or Denmark, where I live, and Luxembourg, and these places, very well organized societies where, of course, everything's there. But you don't have to go very far away before all of this world of money transfer and things becomes really quite difficult. And by not far away, I don't mean into sub-Saharan Africa. I mean into Southern Europe or even into America, where many of the systems we see in America are really quite ancient.
They are ancient, yes.
And when we go there, we find it. I don't know about you, but when I go to America and you try and do money transfer or paying for things, or if we want to share a restaurant bill, I mean, it's a real hassle. Whereas around here, you just kind of do it. That's true. So I think a lot of the new technologies are going to go into the countries which don't have a fully integrated, connected digital currency or digital asset infrastructure, and go directly over into that.
We are actually seeing this in the Southern Americans, like Argentina, Venezuela, other countries like Zimbabwe that actually have such a high inflation in their own base currency, fiat currency, that there's a great demand for crypto over there.
Well, there is obviously. I mean, you've got to store a value. There's two aspects of a currency, if you like. One is that you're going to store your value in it, which means you want it to be nice and stable, really, or at least more stable than the alternatives. We've seen in Venezuela, there's been a lot of, it's one of our big countries, but the Venezuelan thing's even more unstable than Bitcoin, which is kind of almost, how can anything be more unstable than Bitcoin? But it seems to be, people would rather have Bitcoin than that. And then they, of course, have the way to get the money out, which is a dubious quality. I'm not sure if that's a good quality
But
or a bad
talking
quality.
about Venezuela, I've heard a news article that that are several countries are initiating their own central state-backed cryptocurrency, like the Venezuela petrodollar.
Yeah.
What do you think about this?
Well, I think that I'm not sure about it. First of all, I think we have to be a little bit careful about what we read, because I think a lot of our community really want them to do this. So the minute anybody does any sort of hackathon in a national bank or something and they come up with a cryptocurrency, it becomes almost like they're moving the whole world over to that. But there's no doubt that in our, in Holland and in Northern Europe, we don't have any cash anymore. I mean, I don't know if
the Netherlands is actually really great on online banking, online economy, the cashless society. Which is great because you don't have crash, if you get robbed, you don't have anything.
Yeah.
But it also has downsides in order that you give away the control of your own money to certain parties.
That's right, exactly what you do, exactly that. But I see that the new, some of these other countries are they're going to have to develop their financial systems, and these new technologies are obviously what you would do. You would just take new technology into account. And you asked about blockchain as a technology as opposed to the currency side of it. I mean, in certain applications, blockchain is good. In most applications, blockchain is pretty rubbish. But there are certain environments.
It's less efficient.
It's less efficient, it's more expensive, it's many things. And if you anyway have trusted parties involved, which you need to trust anyway, then the whole thing kind of becomes a bit worthless. But there are certain environments where a distributed ledger, let's call it more that than necessarily blockchain.
Yeah, permission blockchain systems.
Permission blockchains are extremely interesting for taking processes that used to be serial processes and bringing them into parallel processes.
And now you're talking more about the use cases of this technology in corporates?
I do in corporates and in corporate ecosystems. So, for example, in the financial ecosystem or in the insurance ecosystem, for example, where something happens and you fill in a form and send it in and you do this, and it's all very linear, it's all, even the electronic systems that are in there today are really just a electrical representation of paper. That you fill in a form and it gets put into another system and somebody looks at it and does some typing in and then does it. I mean, it's not really very advanced. What's much more advanced is if the whole process is transparent and parallel, running for it's going from a serial process to a parallel process. And everybody in the whole supply chain can see that there's a broken motor car on the way in, and that it's now been fixed, and all of this stuff, and they can
especially for these corporates in the insurance or the banking system.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that the technology that was changed and ratified in year 2000, believe it or not, things move slowly, but why move fast when you don't have to? They went through the banking crisis, which was a big event in the corporate banking world, not so much because of the crisis, but because a lot of banks got consolidated. And so when you see something like ING, it's not ING, it's like 5, 6 banks that ING bought, and they have one brand and one colour and try and make a product across 5 systems that are all totally incompatible. So
it's a nightmare for
It's
IT.
a nightmare for them, right? And it's a nightmare that they have. It's not really...
It's realistic though.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you have to be realistic about it, and that's what they have. Now, what are they going to do on the new stuff? They're going to obviously take another step over on technology. The newer banks are going to get newer technology in, and that's inevitable. And some of it is going to be distributed ledger technology. It's going to be, and much of it is not.
True.
It's a different thing, though. I mean, cryptocurrency and DLT are
two completely
different things.
And when I actually read your opinion article back from 2014.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't very popular, was it then?
Back in 2014, not really. It's just started here in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
But I've read it, and I'm really quite fond of it. That you eventually said, or in between quotes here in a paragraph, that most starting companies or most companies, if they don't need any rules or regulations, then they shouldn't adhere to it or shouldn't need it.
I was a big believer in that. I mean, Skype was sort of born out of something called Kazaa. Kazaa was a file sharing network. Now, maybe that was good or maybe it was bad, but anyway, it was anarchistic and it certainly wasn't complying any rules. So the whole ethos of the company was that we wanted to we had a real good ethos, and that was we wanted to remove barriers to communication. So there were barriers which could be many things. There could be barriers of distance, so international. Why should it cost more to ring international than it costs to ring locally? It can be accessibility. In many countries, it's difficult to get access to a phone. You wanted a phone on every computer instead of having one landline in the house. And everything we did was wrapped around that ethos. And one of the barriers to communication is regulation, and there's of course the existing monopolies as they were then, which were just being broken down in the end of the 90s. KPN or somebody in Holland, they wanted to keep their monopoly. Of course they did. Why would you want to give it away, right?
It's a business.
It's their business. And the regulator wanted to be in control of that, and there was a lot of lobby work around it. So a lot of our work was to say, we want people to communicate. How can we do it not by breaking the law, but by doing it in a way that the law just doesn't address. It doesn't talk about it in this way. I mean, this is the thing we see in crypto, where we start to talk about utility tokens and selling those. The law doesn't address utility tokens. So what it doesn't stop, you can do. That's the fundamental basis of law, right? Laws were brought in to govern and regulate society, generally for the better of everybody. But if you can do it without it, then society doesn't need it. I mean, one day the law will come
and do you then also think that a lot of the regulators at the moment are jumping a little too hasty on top of the regulations, the regulatory pressures and the lobbyist groups that they have?
I think regulators now are extremely confused. I mean, when I go and see them...
That's one thing, that's for sure, yeah.
They're very confused because, I mean, they're not unintelligent people, right? And they do the work, and they do it very diligently, and the civil servants who work there are clever people. I have no doubt about that aspect of it. But what they don't know is how to address some of the issues around this, and some of them are deeper issues. What I think the industry, or what our industry or our sector should try and avoid doing is saying, oh, well, we're going to do this in the old way or in the way which is compliant. We have to always think about what are we trying to achieve here. I believe everybody should be able to finance business, and I believe that if you look at investment in companies, in any sort of structured way at least, only the rich people are allowed to invest, right? You have to be what's called accredited investor
in the US, and then you have the peer-to-peer microloaning.
Yeah, we have the microloan industry, which is one thing, and then you have this
the
accredited investor. And the accredited investor is the 1% of society, which as far as I can see is getting richer and richer and richer. Yeah. And normal people are not allowed to participate in that economy at all. So 99% of the society is basically not allowed to participate in the value creation that the 1% has access to. And it's the 1% that are making the rules. So we need to try and find ways of I just think it's a why not allow 99% of people to do what 1% of people can do? And of course they need to be cautious. And what regulators are there for is to do two things, basically. Financial regulators are there to make sure the system works well and it doesn't completely go wrong and money breaks down or banks go bust and things like that. That's good. They need to do that. And they need to make sure people aren't being cheated. And that's what a lot of their investment regulations have come out of. Mm-hmm. In the 80s, I know people in the 80s, or know of people in the 80s, who were phoning old ladies up on the phone and trying to get them to sell shares in companies that almost didn't exist, right? And it was cheating and it was rude and you went to prison and everything. But they really clamped down on that. And I see a bit about that on the ICO world, right? You've got a lot of people with dubious projects who are selling. Yep. The good thing about it at the moment is all in the crypto world. So I think anybody in the crypto world who's invested in an ICO has got some idea they know what they're losing, they know where they are in this, I think.
Hopefully.
I think so. It's such a small, it's such a niche, it's such a Wild West.
It is a Wild West.
That I think you have to be,
cautious everywhere.
You have to be cautious everywhere, and we're all going to lose money on it, and it's all going to be part of our experience in doing that. But as it goes into mainstream, obviously the regulators need to understand how can they protect the investors. And that's by doing...
There's a delicate balance in protecting the investors and consumers and also allowing the projects to happen eventually.
Exactly, and you want the project to happen, right? I mean, there's everybody who has an idea.
So that's the beauty of it. Here in the Netherlands, like Bitcoin Wednesday here, for the past 5 years we've put Amsterdam and the Netherlands on the spot internationally for cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and blockchain. And we'll continue doing this in order to have more cryptocurrency projects also in the Netherlands.
Yeah,
and
I think the cryptocurrency projects are going to get much closer towards many other sectors.
Yeah.
The IoT sector is going to be involved with it a lot. The gaming sector is going to international activities, and so it's I think that having a forum where people can engage and talk and learn and everything about it is what what you've been doing for 5 years, and
thanks. Yeah.
I hope you continue to do it.
We will continue.
Yeah.
My other question is about what you said earlier on in something called Mangrove. On the Mangrove. Excuse me.
No, I don't recall.
Excuse me. Another question then.
Mangrove.
Don't worry about it.
All right.
Another question. So you said earlier on that it's great for the 99% of the people to invest in startups and companies.
Mm-hmm.
They are not able to do this at the moment. So what are the characteristics to invest in your crypto funds that you have now?
Yes, I mean, at the moment, to invest in a crypto fund, you have to be an accredited investor, right? And
it's not ready for the...
It's not ready for that just yet, but I mean, we want to be looking at how we can bring people into this. Yeah. So what I see generally around the industry, I mean, Mangrove at one level is an accredited investor fund, but I see other activities...
Mangrove, yeah.
Neufund have just launched in Malta, for example, a crypto exchange conducted with the Malta Stock Exchange and Binance, and it's an interesting
hybrid
combination, right? You've got the the Maltese Stock Exchange, which is a traditional stock exchange. You've got a new instrument, which is the equity token offerings, which Neufund are administrating, and then Binance, which is a crypto exchange and giving the bridge into crypto. And I think these sort of infrastructure is what we're building now, and maybe that works and maybe it doesn't. It feels quite solid. And we're going to see all sorts of other examples of that. And I think when these instances are built up, then funds are going to come up and operations are going to come up. I mean, when I talk about being able to invest in crypto for the small investor, that's one thing. But what I want them to be able to do is to invest in projects in general, like crowdfunding.
In
general, right? That they believe in and they like and they want to invest in. There may be nothing to do with crypto. There may be a guy who needs a new truck for his business. I'll use an example of a guy who needs a new coffee machine for his cafe or something like that.
So what do you need where you're living now in Denmark?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? What do I need myself? What do I need?
Are there any Bitcoin and cryptocurrency ATMs in your neighborhood?
Right. So Denmark, no, not at all. And indeed, in a society where everything's electronic, where we can transfer money from mobile phone from one person to the other. I don't even know what a Danish coin looks like anymore. Even the beggars accept mobile pay. They have a sign with the mobile number on it. It's very difficult to imagine where a cryptocurrency is going to fit into that equation. I think what we're going to see is what I call the programmable money, what everybody now calls the programmable money, which is loosely the smart contract or whatever you call it. But it's a money that involves functionality. It's a contract within the thing itself. So it's a sort of a hybrid between a contract and the money flows when certain parameters are fulfilled. And I think you know as well as I do some examples of that. But when 3 or 4 things happen, then the guy gets paid automatically, and those 3 or 4 things can be, judged by oracles, judged by external arbiters that thing has actually happened. Yeah, it's rather easy, and then the money flows. So. Like recorded delivery in the mail used to be, you got your money when the mail was delivered. You get your money when the guy plugs the thing into the electricity and it starts to work, for example, or something like that. Those things begin to be interesting.
Cool. Well, do you have any other questions for me?
Well, I don't know. I'm interested. I mean, if you look, where do you see Bitcoin Wednesday
in 5
years, right?
5 years.
Or 20 years or whatever.
Like we all know that this is one big great experiment. I can say from how I started 5 years ago, I went on a forum called Bitcoin Talk and then there was this meetup in Amsterdam called Bitcoin Wednesday. Back then it was about 10-20 people here in Amsterdam just drinking beers and talking Bitcoin. It's grown a little bit more. Luckily I'm now also professionally doing this as well. But the next 5 to 10 years will be divided in a few phases. The phase 1 is the understanding, especially for mainstream users and mainstream people. So I will say if my mother can understand it, it's great.
Yeah.
So,
I'll tell you a funny story.
yeah.
One funny story about my mother. She's now 88 years old.
Yeah.
And she asked me about 4 years ago or something. She says to me, should I buy Bitcoin for the grandchildren? She said, should I buy them a present of some Bitcoin? And of course, what would you say then? You say, no, Mum, that was so stupid. You're mad. Every time I see my old mother now, she says to me, you should have told me to buy that Bitcoin. You give me the wrong advice. You're so stupid.
Well, that's always the... Yeah, it's always the challenge of being the financial advisor then.
Yes, exactly. You should never tell people.
But at least you have the knowledge, so she can learn now.
She can learn that.
Yeah.
And don't spend any money you can't afford to lose, right?
Definitely not.
We're still not there, right, to be honest,
No.
with this industry. And I think actually, I think it's an interesting thing about this industry is we need to get to the point where we don't have to say at the end of every sentence, be careful because this can go wrong, you know?
Yeah.
And I think we're still saying that. You just said it yourself,
Yeah,
and I'm
but
still saying that this experiment might
It's
totally
it's
fail, right?
experimental, definitely. So the understanding of the mainstream and users and consumers in the future, the regulatory understanding also.
And don't forget, we've only got like 25 million Bitcoin wallets, right? I use the word Bitcoin because that's my world, but of course the others is about the same. And 25 million is not very many out of the world, you know. Even any decent, crappy internet app has got like 100, 200 million people using it. So, considering we've got such a mind share and such a share of media within this industry, everybody in the world's heard of it. Well, whatever Bitcoin and things somewhere.
I believe in the Netherlands, the people have heard about 80% of the people in the Netherlands have heard about Bitcoin, but less than 3 to 5% really own Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's right. And it's so complicated, right? And it is complicated.
It is complicated. And then there's the rise of the middlemen having your own wallets as a custodian at the moment.
Yeah, on it goes, doesn't it?
But we shall see what will happen next. I think we will have an interesting coming years ahead.
I mean, I look forward to it. One thing I think that drives you as you go through life is seeing interesting things and being curious and learning about things. And it's certainly keeping my old mind ticking over, thinking about these things and stuff. Some stuff you read and you just don't get it.
Some stuff you need to ask other experts on.
And I'm getting my school books out again to begin to learn stuff again and playing with some maths on bits of paper and all of that. So it's interesting.
It is interesting. One final question, but that's from your background. I believe you also set up an ISP.
I did years ago. Yeah. That was interesting. I actually did it together with, or one of the team members was Nicholas Zenstrom, who actually started Skype. And this was, again, a thing about democratization of stuff. In 1995 in Denmark, the only way of getting onto the internet was either being one of the big companies or being a university.
Okay.
And we thought, well, why don't we do dial-up, right? Really, we copied AOL from America. But the way we pitched it to the public was internet for the people, internet for folket. And we pitched it with red, the kind of socialist colours and all of that, because we really do believe, and I genuinely believe, that giving normal people access to these tools and things is a good thing for society, and elitism is a bad thing. And keeping, then the internet, again, it was expensive to get onto, to make it cheap and accessible,
see now so many decennia later that we have a whole connected world.
Well, that's it. I mean, for me, it's been brilliant that then we could see that, and now, of course, everywhere we go, and basically, at least in our parts of the world and our societies, every single person's connected to the internet, right? Old or young. Clever people or manual people and workers or not workers and things like that.
Isn't then a little bit too challenging? What if the internet will fail eventually, or what if there's no more power? All those kind of questions.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think what we're going to see as well is what's going to change is these dependent services, and the internet's super important now, right? If it breaks, I don't know what happens.
There's no economy left.
We're stuck, right?
Almost.
So obviously the utilities and the regulators and people who look after the electricity and the water and these things, the internet clearly needs to be part of that. And I'm actually a big believer, for all of my democratization, I'm a big believer in the monopoly running or the state running, like the cables and all of that. We want every house in every country to have a cable. We don't want like 3 cables to all the houses in the city and no cables to the house in the country because of the economy. In the telephone world, the old-fashioned telephone world, there was a concept of verzoeningsplicht, I don't know what it's called in Dutch, about the same probably, but you had the obligation to to deliver the service.
Okay.
And you know that's coming on the internet to some level, but it needs to be monitored and the control. I think we see big issues generally on the internet, on cybersecurity and things like that. I think we need to have a different paradigm for devices that connect to the internet. Maybe they should be authorized or running in a secure operating system or something, so that if they're hacked, they can be closed off or something. I don't know how the governance of that's going to work. Of course, it goes a little bit away from the, you know, we can connect everything and do anything we like with the internet idea. Maybe end up with two internets, a kind of utility internet for the really, really important stuff, and then a play internet for the not important stuff. I just don't know.
Okay.
One thing I do know is if my cryptocurrency is in my phone and my pocket, at least it's up for me to look after it. And I like that idea.
Great. Great. Well, thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to your presentation later evening. Thank you for the interview.
Well, thank you very much, Rich. Great to see you. And brilliant with all of that. I think this is amazing. It's been going so long as well. 62 episodes.
62 months. Yeah.
62 months.